So these are the new ones?
Yes, I think so, yeah. By the way, can I control the changes of slides or you need to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So
now you can.
Tell me when to start.
Ari, I hope you have the agenda on some open window. I don't.
Yes, I just about to show that. So I'll make sure to copy the latest from the agenda page. But we are only 1 minute past. I wonder if we should give everyone a couple of minutes to join. I know everyone is stuck in back-to-back meetings these days. But meanwhile,
yeah, my time constant is 4 minutes.
yeah, sorry about the background noise. There was a younger researcher joining the office. This you get for working at home.
Could be also a singer, Ari. Why do you pigeonhole him to be a researcher?
I mean, I give him all the opportunities to what kind of researcher he wants to be.
Exactly. We don't all have to make the same mistakes.
Exactly. Actually, and Milan, if you're okay, I'll revoke the screen sharing for a second. I'll try to share the agenda page.
I'm fine. Carsten posted this anyway.
Okay. And okay. And of course, it wasn't as trivial as I thought.
Try the younger researcher, Ari. This one is buggy.
Yeah, I'll make it easier if I upload the slides. The screen sharing itself isn't always very well working. All right.
It's on, yeah.
Okay, good. So it seems like we are I was expecting at least Michael Koster to join. I don't see him in the roster. Let me quickly ping Michael.
Well, it's ungodly hour on the West Coast.
It is, but usually Michael is wake up early. Okay, but yeah, let's get started. And while we wait for others to join, so the agenda for today, and this was really a draft agenda that we are very happy to bash now in the beginning of the meeting. And we had at least 4 different items that we could continue the discussions. First was this IoT information model standards description, the work that Milan has been driving for quite some time, but we haven't had a chance to discuss it for a moment. Another thing that has been on discussions in various tilting RG fora was this documentation of the learnings of the IoT data model and design, especially versioning. So we have been doing quite a lot of that work in the SDF context and earlier before, and we have noticed that there are recurring things that are, good learnings from this activity that would be very good to document. It's not like we have the final truths, but at least we have some good ideas on things to take into consideration, so how we could get going on that activity. Then we had 2 weeks ago, I think doing research group work meeting on topic of digital twins and IETF technologies. In that meeting, we already noted that, okay, a few things that we didn't have time to discuss that we could perhaps follow up in this meeting. And then finally, if we have time, we could be talking about the SDF future evolution. So SDF has been a recurring topic in the WISHI meetings, especially looking beyond the ASDF working group charter on what should the SDF contain and what should it be doing. So that's what we had on the agenda today, and roughly planned to be done in this order. Any questions or comments from anyone?
Good morning, Michael.
Hey, Michael. Go ahead. You can speak without the queue. We are not that many here.
I just woke up.
Okay. So sorry if I woke you up too early. Okay, but then if there's no questions or comments on this, then I can give Milan you the slide control. And
Yeah, can you bring up the one that Carsten was
Yes.
showing on it? Okay, great.
Just a moment.
Okay.
And now you should have the control. So
Yeah,
please go ahead.
Let's check. Well, not that I can see. I cannot move the slides.
There should be controls at the bottom of the slides for you.
It was.
And I think it also should work with
there it goes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So this is the quick update on the work on IoT standards normalized description, or whatever we want to call it. And it's been going on for a while, as Ari pointed out. I think it's been almost a year since the last update. So the new news is that version 2 of the paper has been posted. I read it up quite significantly. It's same basic idea, but it's pretty printed, and some things are added and sections sort of rearranged. And that version is posted on the WISHI GitHub, so it's available for view. And I'll have to work with Carsten to move it to Cramdown later and get away from the XML encoding, but I didn't have the time for that. It's arcane tools, as you all know. Anyway, so the nutrition label is now in title, and I'll mention a bit later why we may want to keep it. So for today, the decisions we need to make Ari and Carsten, actually mostly Ari and I, have been discussing when and where to publish it as an information draft. I said I felt I needed one more revision, which this I think is. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of publishable as a draft. And by the way, as a side comment, the header I have put T2TRG draft. I guess it shouldn't be wishy, right? That's
yeah, correct. Tinting RG is the right, because we see it's just an activity in tinting RG.
Yeah, I'm sort of fuzzy on the distinction between the two. I fuse them in my mind, but never mind that. And the call to action for today is basically, please provide feedback. As you'll see later, the paper is structured in the introductory discussion of data models and information modeling and presentation, which all of this group knows, and so you can ignore that part. You're welcome to comment on it, but just please review the questions and more or less the categories along which we propose to describe the standards for commonality, and that's a very easy and quick read, so I would appreciate comments. It's on pages 11 through 16 in the PDF version for those who want to skip the rest. And contributions are solicited. As we said before, co-authors are welcome. Acknowledgements will be given to people who comment, depending on the level of contribution. We'll do one or the other, but basically it's meant to be a group paper, not my thing. Since it has been a year since the last update almost, just to remind you, the notion was to create an informational paper draft that describes key features of IoT data standards, mostly those referring to info and meta models, in a consistent manner. So basically have a set of categories, some sort of a categorization, and some key questions to address in common terms, with the notion of helping to understand the landscape of these standards for those who are not intimately involved in defining them, and to give a high-level sort of description in a common format, because as you know, that they have their own sort of nomenclature, terminology, and approach, and at least my experience has been very difficult to compare across them. It requires a lot of reading and digging on terminology before you can start to do that, which is frustrating for those who are marginally involved. I think they give up sooner than they should. So the idea was, by doing this, to basically be usable to researchers and IoT practitioners, not the SDO people who work on an SDO and of course share the common frame and reference that has been evolved over the meetings, and they all understand each other more or less. At least they use the same terms, but the rest of the world not necessarily. Specifically excluded were not to describe the details of inner working of the proposal, just the general categories that I'll outline later. And it's not meant to be a judgment in terms of, one is better than the other or anything like that. It's basically just to understand them by having them explicitly state their choices that they have made, the design choices and scope and approach. And this was, I think, I don't know, between Carsten and I don't remember, but one of us suggested, or both of us, to basically think of it like the nutrition label that you have on the food package that tells you sort of in a standard way what are the ingredients, what are the values for that particular thing that you're looking for. And I'll mention that we are not the only one with that idea. So the next steps is documentation version 2 is out. It's on the GitHub, and we are eliciting your feedback, and we'll incorporate it. It would really be valuable. And this is basically for those of you who remember Pink Floyd. Please do contribute. I was encouraged in the interim since the last report to find out that there are precedents for this approach, and I was pleased to see that. One in particular, I noticed that in Communication of ACM in December of last year issue, they published a paper about the project called Data Sheets for Datasets, which had the similar idea to the common description of the data sets where the data were derived from, the domain, what is the provenance, and what are the characteristics of data, so that people who are developing ML and AI models using those data sets, or who want to revise them or contribute to them, can basically make a fair comparison between them and understand the key objectives and scope, very much like what we are trying to do. And this paper that I mentioned was actually published on a public domain on Archive or Archive, depending how you spell your Greek. In March of 2018, it was more like, okay, let's do this thing, and they published a draft of their ideas of how a standard should be described. Then they had group activity. I know Microsoft was involved also, and a number of researchers from different organizations. And then they collated the results and published a paper on that in this issue of CACM. And they mentioned there, and I have noticed on Archive, there is another paper called the Dataset Nutrition Label. So they stole the idea from us, even though they came first. And I don't know whether it evolved into a paper later, but basically, again, having an idea along the same lines. So the action plan that I propose, or at least I partly tend to follow, is to, as I said, solicit feedback and revise based on wishy feedback and make it available, probably as an IETF draft. It's written in that format, so it's an easy thing to do. And I was thinking of possibly putting it on Archive repository, which has a bit wider reach among the researchers, but I'm not sure whether duplication would help or hurt. It would be nice to get the group view on that. For the time being, I haven't done it, but I could do it if we agree that it's timely to do so. And possibly do a public repository on GitHub to do that, because the one we currently have is, I think, close to wishy. And the hope is that over time, once we do like maybe one pass of revisions, that we'll get some contributed descriptions along these lines of some of the standards from STOs. I'd be happy to work with STO participants to help phrase their effort, describe it in these terms, so that we both validate the approach and that we have something tangible to work with, as opposed to just a paper idea of how it should be done. And I'm sort of starting slowly the movement along these lines probably on GitHub to try to have a set of statements that represent group consensus, whatever the group is, on some things like this, or reference architectures. I have a draft IoT reference architecture that I want to put there, but the main point would be to get the group consensus and opinion on some topics that are of interest, or recently edge computing. I don't know how many papers and definitions you have, or rather papers that talk in detail about edge without specifying what they mean. And there's at least half a dozen different interpretations you can have of that, from IoT to communication hubs and to cloud, reaching all the way to the end. Anyway, it's so basically that's something I plan to do, which is tangentially related to this paper, in the sense that it will certainly be the first out of the gate, and depending on how it goes, we may do some others. And finally, my final foil is just in terms of what's in the paper. As I said, the draft is written. It's basically has introduction and overview statement, definition of data standard models and practices, or rather the approach in terms of object-oriented attributes, thing types, object types, etc., which this audience knows, so you can skip that unless you just want to comment on the phrasing. And then the suggested list of items, categories along which to describe standards, with a few paragraphs on each of what is meant into that category and how to approach describing it. So it's basically objectives and purpose of the thing. There are more details, but there is a domain of usage. One of the problems I've seen is that some STOs have very ambitious goals in terms of domain of usage, how wide domain they tend to cover, but they actually defined object types in much narrower domain. So it would be nice to define what has been defined and what are the future targets for the domains. It would help to understand it better. And the environmental assumptions I'm suggested, basically what's assumed to be in place to make a particular specification work. in terms of serialization protocols, communication protocols, if there are security assumptions, etc. Some of them make implicit assumptions that are not stated, which makes it difficult. It's good to make those explicit and also sort of by inference indicate or explicitly articulate what is not defined and basically is left to the implementers to fill in when implementing a particular approach. And the terminology in terms of the common categories commonly used versus the one that they use if they deviate, like IPSO uses resources for what the other call attributes and stuff like that. And there is also would be nice category, I don't know what to call it, we'll probably rephrase that, of more interest to potential adopters than the general audience, such as metadata handling. I'm not sure. Metadata handling could probably go into the general category in the sense of there's a lot of need for metadata in IoT system implementation, and some of the metadata comes into life in the implementation, actually, in commissioning and installation phase, such as structural relationships between things. And some standards define the metadata, certain metadata as part of their object definitions. But the question here is, okay, what do you do with others? If you want to add more data, can you make it like an orthogonal overlay, or basically how you deal with it? Because what they define is quite rudimentary in terms of actual implementation. And the other more implementation-oriented stuff is creation of new object types. How are new object types created? Basically, do you have to wait for the standard group to define it in order to use it? Or can you propose new one and crowdsource it, like, for example, OCF and Haystack do? Also, development considerations, basically, such as tools or languages to use. Are there reference implementations, and if so, what they are, or way to be found? And possibly licensing terms in terms of, do you have to be a member of the group? Do you have to pay to use the license definition, or is it public licensing terms? Do you have to contribute if you change? Basically, as you know, there's a number of those, but to specify which particular one is used in a given group. And that's basically my last slide, and I would like to go to the second one. Just basically, this is specifies what we need to do. So I would like, I guess said it should be a T2TRG draft, and I don't know if we want to publish just a draft. And as I said, feedback. So I'll take a deep breath and let other people talk.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot, Milan. Maybe a first question. Have you, now that you have a kind of first, kind of stable version of the what to do done, have you actually applied this yet to any of the models out there and see how does it look like?
I have sort of done the paper application of that, but I would really need to work with people who are more closely involved with STOs. Like I have done based on the reading OCF and today, but it's not in the paper. It's in my notes.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to actually schedule a set of interviews at some point in time where we get actual experts for the various STOs and ecosystems and we together fill this in, because a lot of these things you only really can find out if you talk to an actual expert, and if you actually talk, and it's not just enough to send them something to fill in, because they will fill in something that comes from their perspective, and that's not actually useful. So I was doing the same kind of interviewing in the last couple of weeks for the area of IoT networking, and I hope to have something written up about that soon. But I think since you already have something written up, it should be possible to do these interviews, and I would certainly be interested being part of that interviewing approach.
A great question. That's what I was going to ask you. As I said, I have a more description for myself for my own understanding, of various things, and it's my own personal view. So I don't know whether it's better to share that with the STOs so that they can throw rocks at it, or whether it's better to start with a blank discussion, just indicate the categories and see how they would fill them. I can see arguments for both, but I'm not sure what might be a better approach.
Well, even if we share that a draft with them, that doesn't mean they understand what we mean. So essentially, we need to run the actual interview in a way that doesn't really assume anything. But I think it's also courtesy to give them the current state of the document beforehand without asking them to necessarily react to that before we have talked to each other.
I agree. By the way, in this paper that I mentioned, data sheets for data sets, they did exactly that, and they actually in the paper have a description of, I think, two models, basically two data sets that have been described along these lines. So it should be part and parcel of this thing when we are done with it.
Yeah, one can do this in a very researchy way with some coding of various items and so on. I once supervised a PhD thesis where that actually was done, and it was extremely useful. But I think we want to keep this at a slightly lower level of effort. And so I think we essentially, after each of these interviews, we should do two things. One, add the information from the interview, and two, look at the structure of the document, whether we have learned something about how the structure actually can be improved, and then go into the next interview.
I fully agree with you, Pastor. By the way, what's your initial list of those? I was thinking OCF, I don't know, lightweight M2M, right? Is it SDF? SDF is a meta model and Web of Things, but still, that's fine too. That's a category as well. And that should be, I guess, the initial set. I don't know if you have something else in mind.
Michael, go ahead.
I did have something else in mind, and I was wondering whether it would be appropriate to go beyond just the SDOs, because we honestly only have a few SDOs that people are going to be looking at if they're looking at, the table I made years ago that had like 16 columns in it. Most of those aren't really viable candidates. They were just there for sort of technical backup. So I wonder, get to the point, if we could get like AWS, IoT, and other services on here as well that aren't necessarily SDOs, and not just services, but other pieces of technology that people will use in building their IoT systems. And I don't really know what they are. It just occurred to me.
Yes, that would be great, because these are hard to get, but we have some inroads, I guess, with AWS and Azure. Azure is very active in their IoT definition. I don't know how much business they are getting, but they seem to be applying some horsepower to it. AWS too, to a large extent. And
exactly, Azure, even to survey the DTDL as a component. It is, well, I guess that would already be on there because it's kind of the standard. You get the idea.
Right. I think we can be quite liberal in what we accept as an ecosystem here. So it doesn't have to be an SDO. And I'm sure we all agree that AWS is an ecosystem. So it might also be interesting to see what their make or take decisions have been. So where did they actually import things, and where did they go ahead and define their own thing?
Yeah.
That's actually true for all the groups, because all the groups, of course, have seen what's happening around them and have been importing things from other places. And so it's a really complicated web of make or take. And I think one could learn a lot from actually examining that network.
that was really my thought as a person entering this space. That would be my motivation. I would want to be making those decisions. So this information, I would expect, would really help me get a lot closer to being able to make those make or take decisions that I would be making, like in my own product or startup or whatever.
By the way, Michael, for what it's worth, I was fiddling with my LG TV recent model, and I was fiddling with home settings, trying to get something to work, which of course it didn't. But it asked me for the list of OCF certified devices that I may have. So I got a chuckle out of that. At least it's getting to some extent, and it's LG, not Samsung. So there's an effort.
Samsung is on the with Matter now.
Yeah.
I would guess, and not really doing much with OCF in terms of their own stuff. But yeah, that is great news. Thanks.
Yep.
You say this like somebody would say person X is on drugs, say Samsung is on Meta.
Well, they chose the name and they set that up. So I'm just following their lead. They wanted to call it Matter. That's the broad term that gets applied in many ways.
Because it matters. Har, har, har.
Good, Milan. I think we should find some time, maybe in about 10 days, to actually discuss how to progress on this. So this is very, very helpful input. But I think we will probably respin this a few times and change the structure and the form of it a few times before we can say, okay, let's adopt this as a research group document. And actually, I like being an author of a draft before adoption, because it's my decision how I change the draft. Once it is adopted, I have to ask the research group or working group for permission to do something. Of course, this is not a formally executed process, but it's much easier to move things forward in large steps when it's not yet adopted.
Yeah, definitely. No, I was thinking simply as a draft to possibly make it more visible for people who may want to contribute or comment.
Good.
Indeed, and of course, like makes a lot of sense to publish it as an individual draft rather soon, and then so it just gets the visibility, and then we can talk about the research group draft stage later. But no, very interesting, and like when it comes to the interviews, I mean, Milan, of course, IPSO models very well, but I'd be happy to also reflect on those together. I think I also know, and Michael, of course, also knows a lot about the background.
It helps because few people have, like you guys, and Michael is an exception, of having an experience across several definitions and SDOs and stuff like that. When you do a single one, you get caught in the vortex of that particular group and terminology and group think, and it's difficult to step out and compare to others. But that's why having a few people on the interview beyond, other than just from the group, would be great.
Okay. Nice. So I think we have a plan.
Yes.
Very good. So, but for the actual follow-up discussions, should we talk about the logistics for a minute? So, would the next step be then to publish an individual draft, then call for the discussions on that, and I guess the discussion would be like a design team or whatever we want to call it. Smaller meeting, and would then Milan be the one to invite that?
Yeah, I hope Milan can wear the hat, as we would say, But of course, several people will be necessary to move this forward.
Mhm.
So having something like a group of authors or a design team, if not all of the design team people want to be authors, would be a good thing. And I think we should start meeting after Memorial Day. So
Yeah.
in week 22nd, and get some progress there.
Okay.
I had one technical thing that I just need to mention. The word metadata is very, very difficult because it's like describing the world in terms of labels on containers or something like that. It's can be very different things. So I think we need to have a terminology for metadata, and so we can stop using that term metadata because it's just such a wide term. So I think that would be one important thing to do in this
You're right.
process.
I have a lot of opinions on that, but it should be more explicitly articulated in the paper I just thought through. I did it from my own frame of reference, which is not necessarily shared, needs to be explained because there's a lot of nuances there. There's metadata as attributes defined within the standard specification, and then a bunch of it that you can add later, something like haystack. And anyway, it should be more clearly defined. I'll definitely do that. And then as a starting point, and then we go from there. Yeah.
Good.
Great. Thanks. I think we have a good way forward here. Then shall we move to the next topic?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Milan. I guess the next one would be this documenting learnings on IoT data model design and versioning. And Karsten, can you take the lead here?
Yeah, but I'm not really very well prepared. So we have had within the last 2 years or 3 years actually, we have had various discussions about versioning, and you even can find slides about versioning in the Wishy repository. And it seems like since that term comes up again and again, and there even is a regular design team in the NetMod working group, which defines Yang, that discusses versioning of Yang modules. They have been meeting every week for like 3 years now. They're still not done. I think this is a very interesting subject, and I think that there are some areas where I think we now have some relatively stable knowledge about which approaches work and which don't. And there are other um, areas where we have very different views, but I think those examining those differences can actually be quite useful. It's time to get something written up about that. And we were going back and forth between setting up a little bit of wiki space where people can type in their stuff, or maybe doing this in a slightly more formal way, writing a draft that tries to collect information that we already have documented in some form. But it seems to me that we need to do this next. And I tried preparing something for this meeting, but the wealth of various pieces that we already have put together here was a bit more than I could handle for this meeting. My question really would be who would be comfortable with actually throwing things out in a wiki, and who would be more comfortable running this as a normal internet draft activity, of course, on the individual level first, until we have enough information that we start agreeing. And of course, the objective would not be to define the one and final ultimate solution to the versioning problem, but to have terminology so we can discuss different versioning approaches in a way that allows us to describe their benefits and perils. So back to my question, who would be more interested in contributing to a wiki, and who would be more interested in writing a draft?
So personally, I don't have a strong opinion. Both would work.
Well, in the end, it's both Markdown.
Yeah.
The difference is that in the wiki, you don't assume that you have a structure of the document yet, and in the draft, you by definition have a structure of the document.
So if the structure isn't well known, we might be better to start with the wiki, which is kind of what I was feeling like, because we don't really know. It feels to me like we want to sort of try to explain a few different ways of managing evolution of artifacts, and not just, maybe not even just versioning, because like when I was at Smart Things, we didn't version things. We just updated the thing, and if we broke it, we made a new thing. And that's, it's not versioning, it's like specifically not versioning, but that would be part of it too. Anyway, it feels to me like kind of the wiki approach might be a better way to get started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe the initial gathering thoughts pass could be done in a wiki, and then move to the draft when we have something we can maybe mention in a summary meeting.
Takes a long time for a chat item to turn up. So I just put in the pointer to the existing wiki page in the chat, but of course the point about the wiki is that you can make new pages. They should just be linked from this page. So yeah, I think doing this in a very unstructured way is maybe the best way to capture the brainstorming kind of aspect. Yeah, there are two talks that are linked from that page that I think Klaus' talk is missing. Okay, we can fill that in.
Good point. I actually uploaded the slides recently because we forgot to upload them originally.
Yeah, I
But they
think
are
there
now
were
in
some
the slides folder.
pretty useful things in there. And I think the point of these individual pages is that they should be opinionated. So they really should, they can include opinions. They don't have to be just an objective description, and we can objectify this later. So maybe I should make a page, versions are stupid, and fill this in with the stuff I have been saying before in various meetings. Okay, so that's about all I have on this item, and maybe we should also announce this on the mailing list. I can draft an announcement for that. Maybe fill in a few pages and then announce it and fill in some more.
Actually, thinking about on the contributions, I mean, Klaus, do you think would it be possible to write a paragraph intro on the one slider that you made? It might be a bit out of context for someone who hasn't been part of the discussions?
Not sure. I don't really have an itch to scratch here. From my point of view, I can report 2 bits from what is done in practice. And one is sometimes people don't seem to care at all. So they have no versioning or evolution scheme for their data models. So they just fix whatever they want to change. And those who actually do care do some variant of what I describe in my slides.
Okay.
I presented those slides to, I think, after the IETF Singapore meeting and the OMA discussions around data models. And there they said it doesn't really work for them. And I heard similar things during the discussions for Wishy, or when we discussed those versioning topics in Wishy meetings. And I would actually be interested to learn why people think that what I described on my slides don't work for them, because that's what I'm seeing is being used in practice where it works.
Yeah, I think that versioning is an area of software design where we have a really heavy influence of process configuration. So people describe how it should be run and now not how it actually will be run. And so there is a big gap between them, and this gap, of course, destroys all the wonderful properties that the original design had and replaces them by some ugly realities. So that's my main take of the area of versioning. It's really easy to come up with a pristine, beautiful scheme, but the first time it meets reality, it's not going to survive.
What I've mostly seen in reality is that there's an initial set of data models that people create, usually an extensive set, and then that suffices for the next couple of decades. And maybe they do some backwards compatible additions or so. Or sometimes when there's a big change needed, something like we want to change from integers to floating point in all our sensor properties. They just fork the whole thing and do this bulk update and call it second generation or whatever. But in practice, there doesn't seem to be a lot of evolution after the initial set of models is set in stone.
Do you think this is a bug or a feature?
Seems to satisfy all their demands. So they don't seem to have a need for a lot of evolution. And then if there's something coming up every 20 years or so, they just create the new generation of the whole thing, and that's it. So if they want to change something, that seems to work for them.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Ari.
Sorry. Yeah, I think there are two parts of that. One is that, like, okay, let's say a substantial new requirements come, and that's why you need to change. The other part is like, whoops, that was a bad design, or like, whoops, we made a mistake. And I've seen both, and there's surprisingly many of the second one. And you can even after using some models for 10 years, you realize that, like, that was a mistake. So maybe it might be useful to kind of describe these two different reasons, at least these two different reasons for evolution. And both may result in either, small tweaks or backward compatibility breaking things.
Well, there actually is a third reason for a change, and that's actually when you try to merge in other stuff. I think OCF has a lot of experience with that aspect. Fortunately, they did this before they actually cast their models in stone. But for something like 1DM, when they try to get a new ecosystem to join, somehow there will be a need to accommodate the special features of that ecosystem. So if that other player thinks that cheese firmness is really important, then you won't be able to ignore that. So you need some form of evolution.
So that seems like a useful insights to write down.
Yes.
And giving names for those categories that we can then identify what are those when we talk about these issues. Great. So I guess it would be the matter of starting the wiki page, drafting some of these thoughts down, taking a follow-up in one of the upcoming Wishy meetings, and see where we are. Does that sound like a good way forward?
Yeah. So let's say we give ourselves 2 weeks to actually start this set of pages, then announce it on the mailing list. So the other people already find something that's wrong and they need to correct. The best way to get an answer on the internet. Then we should pick it up at one of the next meetings.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, then shall we move on in the agenda? Then I
Yes,
could
please.
make a digital twins follow-up. And apologize, I'm going to need to mute occasionally and cough a little, but hopefully I'll be able to talk this through. Let's give a quick recap on the digital twins meetings that we had a couple of weeks ago. We had there two main topic areas. One was from the work done in the DTC, Digital Twin Consortium, and the other one was the work done at the IETF. And just a moment. Oops. Younger researcher wants to be participating again. So the DTC work, there was the work done on what they call connection profiles. That work was mostly about modeling relationships between nodes. And the idea would be that the nodes in a system would be announcing the profiles they can consume and serve. And then you have this system of systems view, and the systems would look up the models, create instances in the context. And you would be able to determine features about the system based on these relations, for example, about trustworthiness. And the DTC folks who presented this, their idea would be to standardize some of these descriptions at the IETF, and they were now plotting these early ideas in the context of the Indian research group. There is an early draft about this that hasn't been published yet, but if I understood correctly, the next step for them would be to publish that and then get a bit of feedback, perhaps in Indian RG, and then take it, for example, in the dispatch to the IETF side if there are needs to be for standardization. There was a somewhat lively discussion on multiple features of that proposal, especially around discovery and DNSSD, and whether DNSSD could be a good solution. Some discussion whether it's real-time versus static info, where the DNSSD could be more on the former and the connection profile on the latter. Some questions on scalability, etc. But I guess the next steps here are we're waiting for the draft to be published and then take the discussion from there.
So while you're talking about DNSSD, there is an interesting discussion going on in Anima right now, where they actually are looking again at using resource directory and to do their discovery, and probably need some way of interaction between existing DNSSD. I cannot call them directories, but that's what they really are. and something that is based on core resource directory. So if you are interested in this, maybe you should peek into the Anima working group. So this is a bit off topic on digital twins, but I think since the NSSD came up, I think that's a useful pointer.
Great, thanks, Carsten. If there's no more comments or questions on this, I could jump to the IETF work. So for the IETF related work around digital twins, Carsten gave a short introduction to the work happening at the Network Management Research Group on network digital twins. And then on the IETF side, work we're doing on Sdf in the 1DM and ASDF groups. Then we had two more specific presentations around using IETF technologies for digital twins. One was around digital twin definition language, so the language that is used on the Azure platform for describing digital twins, and in particular how we can be converted to Sdf and through Sdf to the other models that we have been working on. And a short summary is that like 80% of things map easily, as it tends to be across different languages and models in different ecosystems. But then there's a remaining 20% that needs a bit more attention. But overall, seems to be Sdf seems to be quite good fit for these kind of digital twin languages like DTDL. And one thing that was pointed out that doing this work together, like what we've been doing now with the DTDL for Proxima Azure, it seems to be a good opportunity to drive also consolidation of the language features. So like we've been discussing that, hey, this kind of thing is facing Sdf, whatever, how it looks in DTDL, and having them, those by design, very similar, then we will have a less fun hassle translating between these models going forward. So it's actually good to be sharing common design patterns and ways to express things. One particular thing that was identified missing in Sdf today is this more complex relationship information. So the DTDL has a specific definition style for that. So the suggestion from Petri, who was presenting this work, would be to define this extension as a new IETF draft, and that's planned to be published someday soon. Also, Michael mentioned about his work on property graphs here that we didn't have a chance to discuss in more detail. So that's one of the topics we could actually discuss now here in this Wishy meeting. Then there was another technical topic around building digital twins with interim IoT technologies, where Bing Xiao presented his work on building a digital twin systems. And in particular, they have been experimenting with the use of Sdf and ZenML for digital twin systems. So Sdf for describing classes of devices and linking to instances, and then ZenML for feeding in the data to the digital twin system. And as been pointed out, seems to be a quite good match so far in the early exploration. And in that context, we also talk quite a bit about the different needs for models for southbound. So be able to describe devices. That's what, for example, Sdf is pretty good for. But then also for northbound, digital twins are all about expressing information and knowledge. And there you probably need something more powerful mechanisms. But having these two different capabilities nicely mapped together seems to be a useful approach. That was a short summary of the digital twins work meeting. Any questions or comments before we jump to the details of the property graphs? Okay, well then in that case, maybe Michael, now we would have a bit more time that we didn't have in the previous meeting to talk about the property graphs. Do you want to give a quick intro on what are your thoughts here?
Oh, so that's interesting because I haven't really prepared a presentation on this.
No worries. I was thinking like off the cuff,
so,
like we did last time.
Yeah. So and I do have some code examples that I could show if we really need to, but I think it's probably easy enough to explain that I was trying to apply Sdf to model a digital twin ontology that we use at Passive Logic we call quantum ontology, which is basically it's kind of, you know, it kind of spends a lot of descriptive effort on physics and modeling things at that level, a complete physics model. And it also spends a lot of descriptive effort on buildings and how buildings work and how the important features of building constructions with regard to ventilation and energy and things like that. So they're pretty abstract models, but basically what I wanted to do is it's just simple object property model. That the technology requirements aren't very complex. RDF would probably work or something like that, but as it turns out, it's probably going to be implemented in Swift code, internally. But we need something to, a JSON format or whatever. So I was looking at Sdf, and it's really pretty much objects and properties would do it, except that the linkages are needed. So when the linkages are essentially what other thing are you pointing at? It's really almost like a web link. It's like what are the things you're pointing at? What's the relationship to that? And starting with something like structural relationships, like this thing is this actuator is part of a valve assembly, and the valve assembly contains the actuator. So simple structural relationships and how things are connected. This pump is connected to this valve through this pipe. So, describing these connections, and then there's more to it, like describing mathematical operations and things like that we need to do as well. So, but it's a small set of predicates. It's not predicate driven like RDF. And so that's why I said RDF is not really, the first choice here. But you could do it in RDF, but it's not really predicate driven in the same way that you would construct a large RDF model. It's more like a meta model, like a web of things model, where you could use RDF, but you only have a small number, or what we're doing in IoT schema, or even Sdf itself for that matter. So a small set of types and things like enums are useful, but the connection was really the thing that would be useful to standardize. And what I found with that and some other experiments was that what wanted to do was be able to describe the basic relationships between types and what was allowed, what can be allowed to contain another thing and what can't. So the basic structural constraints. As well as you wanted to be able to describe an instance graph using the same tool. And I think that's something we have not got into yet with Sdf, but it's something that comes up quite a bit. And we even last week have a graduate student from Portugal, PhD student from Portugal, wanting to use Sdf to describe instances and wants protocol bindings and wants all this stuff now. So anyway, the idea is you want to be able to describe instances as well. So in driving toward a format here, I thought, well, okay, so you need a pointer to the object that you're linking to, but that's really two pointers, because you need the type constraint or types that can be pointed to, and then you also need the pointer to an actual instance of an object. So in Sdf, that would be a JSON pointer for now, or it could be a JSON path expression at some point, but right now we just say JSON pointer. So essentially you need two slots for pointing to things, one for the type and one type constraint or set of types, or however that works. In Sdf, there's a way that it works. And the actual instance when you construct an instance graph. So even if you do basically an ontological graph, that would just fill in the type constraints and cardinality. And in Sdf, we have kind of limited cardinality. So that's one thing, there's an opportunity for improvement there. Cardinality constraints. So there's that, there's a relationship, and usually that's just a thing that comes from an enum or a registry of some sort and has some rules, like maybe it can be a URI if it's a unique relationship. And then, so I started constructing some of these graphs, and then I realized there are some cases where when you're modeling something, there's additional information that's sort of target attributes or link properties. And so there's another category that can be used as link properties or target attributes. And property graphs are, when you say property graph, there's an actual spec that says here's what a property graph does or whatever. But I'm talking more generally here about a link that can contain additional properties on the link. So in addition to a type or relationship type or having a rel, it can have some properties that go on the link. And I think lately people have even relaxed. I was looking at Nottingham's last thing, and it looks like they're kind of saying that even target attributes and link attributes are not much different and don't have to be distinguished that much. That's kind of what I read from a statement not made in that draft. So I kind of agree with that. So we don't really need to separate target attributes from link attributes. But anyway, I created a data structure with four slots. And that, depending on how you use that, that's where the extension is. So SDF relation would be a way of building it into the language. I found that really what I could do is build it in as a property, and you could actually make it as an exposed property of the object, but that might not always be the case. So a language extension may be suitable, and that's for something like relationship. The thing that really is missing, though, the basic thing that would allow you to do this is exposing the SDF pointer type to the user, and then having the user be able to point to other definitions as a data type that they have in the user. So building it in as a part of the SDF relation would be one solution to that, and make it a language feature. And then if I wanted to, but I want to be able to expose these things as user properties also, and I want to be able to have a user abstraction for how we point from one object to another, or how we point to another, even it isn't really an object. It's kind of any SDF definition. It would really be like the way we use SDF ref. Another way would be to wrap it up in a language extension like SDF ref, but instead of using ref, call it SDF pointer, and then just have that be a quality that you could set. That could be a pointer of a structure that you define. So there are a few different patterns. Ari and I have both experimented with a couple of patterns. I have another piece of work that I'm doing that that kind of goes along with the last bullet on this slide, and that I'm building an SDF digital twin of code. And it's C++ code objects that run on constrained devices like Arduinos and embeds and stuff like that. But the idea is you do all the programming and linking of the object. It's data flow graph based, and you do all this up in the model with SDF, and then you sort of push a button and it generates the code for your target, and that you maintain that SDF model as a digital twin. So I had to encounter all of these things with how do you make instances and how do you point to them and all that. And really the only big thing missing was a way to really say, here's a model, and in this model, this thing points to this other thing. And then I'm going to make an instance, and in the instance, I'm going to replace that pointer with some other kind of pointer. In the C++ code, it's just a bit of a struct that has, a regular C++ pointer in it. So that's kind of the work that I'm doing. And I think that in general, I think that it all converges on the need to have a standard way of doing these linkages, where we could do it in an ad hoc way, but I think there's a lot of value in building an interoperable way to do this that meets everybody's needs. So if that wasn't totally clear, I do have some examples and stuff, but I think that maybe we have kind of moving on in the meeting. We have another 20 minutes or so. So that's really, any questions, comments, but that's really kind of a summary of where I'm at on this topic.
Mm-hmm. No, very good, Michael. And I think it would be, kind of going forward on, as we discussed earlier, we have very similar needs on the relationship information, and it would be like writing down those a few more examples and then taking a focused session on that topic would be my suggested way forward. See like how much we can address with specific designs, and I do actually agree. I think we have two classes of relationship needed. One is kind of more design time information, and one is that what you said, like exposing the users. So doing in a similar way as we do properties today, that you can read and write them during runtime and change them. And I think they are two distinct classes. but it could be very, very similar on the design level.
Yeah, that's a good summary. I found that it was useful to have both types of linkages, both the design time. Well, I guess there's two different things, right? Yeah. I didn't find anything I couldn't do if it was wrapped up in a language feature as a standard. I just did things in an ad hoc way as a property, but there was a need to, generate some kind of one kind of pointer from another in a protocol binding. And so that's really, I think the needs could probably be reduced down to things that are safe patterns. And I'm not sure that just exposing a raw JSON pointer is exactly the pattern we want. It works in, it works in the code that I wrote, but I'm not sure it's exactly the way to, standardize it. So there's one question there, is that do we just want to say, well, because it's SDF, and we're already using SDF ref and some other things, let's just figure out another way to what the needs are for how we expose SDF pointers. And then, yeah, let's build a bigger feature that's like more like a quality that has some structured or some qualities to build a structure out of, however that works. And do we need a wiki for this like the other one then? How do we, so we have these little examples on I want to say gist, but whatever. It's our chat system. But maybe we should have a wiki to basically try to ratchet this forward a little bit. You already did that, didn't you? Howdy?
Yeah, we have those IETF notes pages, but I don't think we have a necessarily wiki page. I could look it up, but I think that's a good idea. That would be a place where we collect at least pointers to those notes, that we have everything in one place. And
my other question,
I could
go
have,
ahead.
yeah, I could also have a chat with my colleague to ask, like, he was planning to put a 0.0 draft out someday soon, so I could ask what's the situation with that, so we could have some more stable pointers to refer to. I guess that would be useful.
Yeah, just a place to collect things, because I have some examples, but I would want to be able to maintain them as well and say, well, that wasn't quite right. Here's a little bit better way. And also I wanted to sort of follow up when you said 80%. So is the 20% mostly in relationship, or there's some other things that we should look at as well? Is the topic just linking, or is the topic sort of SDF for digital twins or something like that? But anyway, that's maybe for later. But I think we could make a wiki and have that to be a place where other people that we're working with could go in and sort of, we could just point them there and say, there's the state of things. Here's what we're working on. Here's our open issues. What do you think? Comments, ideas, etc.
I think a good thing to have would be, first of all, a definition for what kind of links we are seeing here at all, because it's very, very different whether a specification, a model, links to another model, and whether an instance of that model links to another instance. So these are completely different things. They point into different namespaces. And one thing we would probably need to find out is, how do we model the names of actual things? So right now they don't have names, so we are not discussing this. But if we actually want to have links as a data type on the instance level, then of course these links need to point somewhere, and that needs some form of identity space. So I think it's important to understand the properties of these links, and I think it's also very, very important to make sure that we don't accidentally mix them up.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's what I was driving at. I have an architectural solution, so I don't really care what they are, because I make instances in SDF, and I point to SDF instances with SDF pointers, and then each of those instances can worry about how it needs links on its own. I just basically punted on that and said, well, since I'm making an SDF instance, I don't really need to worry about defining an instance from an SDF model. I have an SDF instance. I can just go straight down. but a general solution is needed. That was Carson. That was a good way to express how we need to really approach it.
So if I have a light switch, I need to have a pointer, a way to describe how to put the pointer to the actual lamp in there. And that may be very different in Bluetooth from how it looks like in MQTT or in a REST environment.
It really is. I just did a binding, so that was easy. An actual mapping and translation would be something that people would more likely use.
Okay, good. But I think we have there also a way forward. If we start this wiki page, start collecting those, yeah, more concrete examples on what we want to be achieving. I think that's going to be a good way to go forward here. And I think and also I think from our side it has been really, we wanted to make more progress here already earlier, but it's been so many things and so little time. So I guess we're slowly moving forward. Good. Any more discussion on this topic before we move to the final agenda item? And actually, maybe before we go to the final agenda item, we could spend a few moments on thinking about when would we like to have a next Wishy call. Okay, hearing no comments here. What's the general? Because we have a few more, let's say, more focused design team meeting sessions scheduled now when it comes to the nutrition labels work and others. So we don't necessarily need to have a Wishy call to progress those. So I guess we're talking about something around June before summer vacations that we could have one more Wishy call. Personally, I'm planning to be July on vacation, starting from midsummer. So I'm thinking around basically 1 month down the road, there could be an option for a quick catch-up meeting if you want to have one before summer vacations. So thinking like the 16th of June, for example. Any thoughts on that?
Outside the Catholic countries, that will work well.
That's a public holiday somewhere?
In Bavaria, yes.
Oh,
Not sure this is a problem, but
then I guess the Wednesday 15th, maybe is there a CBOR again? Or,
there is a
well, I mean,
CBOR again, yes.
okay. But I guess maybe that's a question to you, Karsten, and well, rest of Bavaria. How are I don't know what's the level of working slash bank holiday, where is that on the spectrum? If there's a proper vacation, then we shouldn't use that.
I think it's an actual holiday, but I must admit, because I'm not living in Bavaria, I don't know.
I'm also not living in Bavaria, but I'm not working on the 16th.
Alrighty, then maybe that's not a good day.
Ari, are you aiming for the 15th? I'm probably going to be traveling that day. So anyway,
Okay, then
from Lisbon.
And that's not a good one either. Fridays are always tricky. One option would.
What about the 14th? Is that an option or not?
Unfortunately, there's something already booked for my evening.
Fine.
So I'm looking at the Monday.
Monday works for me.
The 13th, you mean, or the 20th?
13th.
Okay.
So, and should we do the same time we did today? Or well, Michael, maybe this is for the West Coast question. We don't want to wake you up for all the wishy calls. Should we do it 1 hour later, or well, I guess Milan also for
No
you.
problem. I'm usually up at five, so this is a good time for me actually.
Jesus.
Okay, and Milan, if that's also okay for you at the same time.
Yeah, fine. I'm sorry. I just was going to travel on the 15th, so that would
Okay.
I would be away. That's all.
Right. Then let's aim for the Monday 13th as the next catch up in the full Wishy group. Great. Thank you. Then the final topic, SDF future evolution.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah. So maybe we don't. Maybe we can talk briefly. What should we talk about in the next meeting?
Well, probably what we talked about before, which is this whole property graph thing, which I think needs some thinking into the future. So there are lots of other things going on. We probably should spend some time on mapping files. But yeah, there's work to be done there. So actually the draft for that expired, and I'm working with Jan to write new stuff so we can meaningfully revive that. Yeah, I think that this property graph thing, the whole class versus instance thing, I think is the focus of the next step.
Yeah, what is an Sdf instance? Because we talked about like, oh, it needs a network address, but if it's a lightweight M2M object, it maybe only needs an object ID and a resource ID. So we need to definitely kind of figure out, and what does it even look like? What are the refinements and how do they work? There's a bunch of topics there that I've been doing a lot of hands-on and understand sort of at the hands-on level what some of the issues are as well now.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's actually a very good topic. So we could talk about the instances and the instances and relations, as we discussed before. They go very hand in hand. So I think that's a very good topic.
Language in the draft about resolved, about SDF being resolved, and I think that's a good framework to extend to talk about this.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then we could have a look at where we are with the other two activities that we are now kicking off, and like how do we best take them forward. So I think we have a good agenda items there already. Great. So anything else before we want to close for today?
I have a pedestrian question. Off the record, and it seems to me at a very high level of abstraction that SDF and Web of Things are in a way after the same thing, being the meta model and representing attributes of other presentations. So are they complementary or basically a replacement for each other, or am I completely off?
See also class instance distinction. So SDF started off as a way of defining classes and types mostly, and doing that at a low enough level so that you could construct an API around them if you had a protocol binding. Web of Things started off with basically defining a high level categories like event, action, and property, but focused on defining instances and how those are mapped. So I think they're complementary at a certain point. An SDF definition can be referred to by a Web of Things document.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, there's also a certain extent of it really makes sense to not have a single development effort in this space. So each of us doesn't have to repeat the stupid decisions that the other one did. And so the Web of Things thing model was created after we already had SDF, and so they could learn from us and maybe do things in a different way. And we are going to do instances long after the Web of Things instance model exists, so we can maybe learn from them and avoid some of the problems there. So
The
I
other
think
thing
that's
that
useful.
oh, sorry, go ahead. Well,
Yeah.
one more thing about SDF and 1DM is that the model is based on being able to have fixed reference namespaces for definitions, and Web of Things has nothing like that. And there could be a registry of thing models or something, but we build the path directly into the abstraction, which has turned out to be, I think, a pretty good choice. But that's what allows it to be a definitional, and what distinguishes it from the Web of Things. Even thing models don't really have this idea of fixed URI references like we do. By we, I mean 1DM and how SDF supports that.
Alrighty, good. I think we may have lost Milan.
Yeah.
Maybe he lost connectivity. But I think that was a very, very good question. And I wonder, I mean, we did write that down somewhere, like what is the relationship between TD work and SDF work? But I don't remember where we write it down. Maybe we should have a stable pointer to that piece of information. Because yeah, it does get asked.
And then mention that conversion, because it's really from TD to SDF. There's very little, or sorry, TM to SDF. There's very little fix-up needed. It's just the only question is what's a thing modularity and some stuff like that. But there are tools that do that already, and so we can sort of have a whole little sort of slide on the topic, probably.
Yeah. So of course, my point of view is that what is just another ecosystem for SDF, and what people probably think that SDF is just another ecosystem for what.
We've got to a point where that's okay, and that doesn't actually get in the way of things moving forward.
Alrighty, good. I guess that's a great conclusion for the discussions today. Alrighty.
Okay.
Anything else before we close
Model
for
as
today?
opposed to an inheritance model, and we've all grown out of the old C++ model.
Good. Okay, well, in that case, thank you guys for the great discussions today. I think we have a way forward on the multiple sub items, and then let's have a second look in the next Wishy meeting. But meanwhile, we can of course, as usual, catch up over email and Telegram and all others, and we'll be seeing in the various 1DM, ASDF, and whatnot meetings. Okay, thanks, and have a nice rest of the day, and talk to you soon again. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.